Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about vote fraud versus election fraud. Dr. Simone Gold joins me to talk about Biden's track and trace plan, and DOJ election fraud investigation and Biden buyer remorse, and finally, federal agents question, to put it lightly, the postal worker whistleblower we talked about the other day. And then, of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
Now, hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. I want to make a really important distinction as we go through this time period between Election Day, November 3rd, and December 14th, when we are going to have the Electoral College meet, and if either candidate gets to the magic 270 electors, that will be the way we'll go forward. But what I want to talk about in the first five is the difference between vote fraud and election fraud. Vote fraud can take all sorts of forms. Dead voters voting. So obviously someone voting for a dead voter. Here in Texas, we just had our state attorney general announce charges against an employee of a senior center. These are people with dementia and memory issues, having registered and voted for 139 people in the home where she was working. That is vote fraud. There are countless, I am talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of vote fraud in this election cycle, and they matter and they should be prosecuted. But they are not really why there is this, they aren't alone the reason why there is so much attention being paid to this election and what the real outcome was. Because vote fraud, my terminology, vote fraud is voters do something that's bad. They send in their ballots and they're late, or they vote when they're not registered, something like that, or vote for dead people, other people. Election fraud, to borrow the left's term, is a systemic thing. Election fraud is when an entity actually systemically invades the election process and does things that have massive, large number of vote consequence. Millions and millions of votes consequence of this kind of fraud. This is what Sidney Powell's been talking about when she's been talking about this just astonishing thing that you heard about in our show, where we had Russell Ramson on the show last week, I think it was, and months ago and a year ago, explaining what his organization here based in Dallas, Texas, the Allied Security Operations Group, has uncovered, which is that not only does a capacity exist for a hacker, not even a high-grade expert hacker, but just a reasonably well-trained hacker, can get in to the electronically stored database of voters. So all these voters vote in early voting, and the vote sitting there recorded in some computer somewhere, and then between that sits there until election day. You have election day voting, and then everybody finds out, how the early vote went and how the election day voting went. Well, if someone has been manipulating data stored in the voting machines, that is election fraud. That is the massive issue that Sidney Powell is arguing has occurred. And she has not backed off from this. She mentioned it. I actually talked with her about it several times in person. She has mentioned it, alluded to it on this show. She has spoken about it at great length on other shows. And she is now part of the Trump team that is trying to dig in and prove that this kind of fraud occurred in this election cycle. And there are growing indicia of the likelihood that this actually did occur. I will tell you also, she has a new website up called defendingtherepublic.com. Sidney Powell, defendingtherepublic.com. But it's important when your friends who say, well, election day happened and, fair and square, looks like, after all, the media called it for Biden, so I guess he won. If we're talking about the systemic level of election fraud that seems to have occurred, not just the voter fraud, isolated anecdotal instance, but actual election fraud, we're talking about the corruption of the entire system our country relies on to move forward in the peaceful transition of power from one administration to the next, how our country moves forward, holding on to being a democratic republic. Sidney Powell would never say on national television that these things occurred or that she believes they occurred because she has heard spotty evidence. I've actually seen the presentation, the in-depth presentation created by this group, ASOG, that uncovered this. I know Sidney has seen it. I know many people have. I'll tell you one last thing in closing up the first 5 today. I know, not just speculating, I know that what ASOG uncovered, this Russ Ramsland and the ASOG group in Dallas uncovered, which was not just proof that somebody with a moderate level of skill could hack in and change election results, but actually his organization showed it did already occur. Happened in the 2018 elections. Their allegation is it actually flipped the result of the governor's race in the state of Kentucky. And I know that that information made its way to the White House before Election Day. I know it went to one of the very top officials in the White House. Therefore, I'm going to guess that the Trump team, you keep seeing all these very positive tweets out of President Trump, more proof coming, more information coming. I don't think he's just, blowing smoke in the wind. I don't think he's just trying to keep the troops cheered up. I think they are into exactly what Sidney Powell is talking about. I think that's the basis of some of the evidence that it is what they are creating as a basis of litigation in this country. And it is vitally important. If you are a left-wing Democrat who would never vote the Republican the rest of your life, or you're a right-wing Republican, or anybody, any place in between, if we don't have elections that actually can be relied upon, that you can trust the results actually reflect the decisions by legal voters, then you don't have, you might as well live in a banana republic. You might as well live in a country where people who can engage in this kind of conduct and they continue to engage in it and it's never uncovered and never exposed and no prosecutions happen, there will be no more voting in this country that matters. It is that important. Sidney Powell said last night, and I'm wrapping up my first 5 today, Sidney Powell said last night that this is the most important 2 months right now, the most important 2 months in the history of America. Because if we don't uncover the truth of what came out in this election cycle, and all, not just little voter fraud issues here and there, but the actual conduct of the election, the litigation pending in Pennsylvania and other places, which if you heard Hans von Spakovsky in the show a couple days ago was talking about what is the allegation in Pennsylvania. If we don't get this cleared up and we don't get to an honest result, we truly are letting down future generations of Americans, and we are actually letting down the whole experiment in human liberty that is America. And that, my very fine friends, is today's first 5. So I wanted to mention we have a great guest joining us. She is online. It is Dr. Simone Gold. She's joined us in the past on this show. And I will tell you that if you recognize that name, I'm sure you do if you pay attention at all to the news in our country related to COVID. She's the founder of America's Frontline Doctors. She's been a leading voice trying to talk to people about what really is going on with COVID with respect to whether or not we need to have the shutdowns America has experienced in response to COVID, whether our reaction has been overdone, whether successful therapies exist to treat COVID so that we do not have to have people living in fear. And I want her to come on today because there was an announcement by the Biden team. He who would be president, Joe Biden, he is not president-elect. He is candidate Joe Biden. But he has put out what he plans to do, one of the ways he plans to fight COVID, and that is his terms. He's going to establish a public health job corps, like a new entity, public health job corps, mobilizing at least 100,000 Americans across the country with support from trusted local organizations and communities most at risk to perform culturally competent, we'll talk about that, approaches to contact tracing to protect at-risk populations. He's talking about massive national contact tracing, all because of COVID, funded by you, the taxpayer, and organized and run by the federal government. And I wanted to ask a great expert, Simone Gold, what she thought about that. So I believe we have her online.
Hi. Hello, Debbie.
Hi, Dr. Gold. So good to see you. Okay, so I didn't even know if this had, I was messaging you earlier this morning, but this is Biden actually saying an army of 100,000 culturally competent contact tracers to deal with the threat of COVID. Please tell me what your first reaction. Do we need such a thing?
Oh my goodness, no. So let's start with the science. Public health doctors know how to trace epidemics, but the usage of such tracing is when a disease is limited or early. So for example, we contact trace positive syphilis results, right? Because you have a few people who have it and they have limited exposure, and you can go back and track like that. Once the disease is out there in the community, there is simply no history or precedent or usefulness to testing massive portions of the population for that thing. In addition, we should assume that SARS-CoV-2 is fairly ubiquitous at this point. When they check people who are asymptomatic, they're finding 20% antibodies, and the suspicion is there's another 50% that are immune from B-cell immunity, from T-cell immunity, which does not show up in the blood test. The reason we believe that is in every community across the world, when we come close to 20% positive immunity on the blood test, the disease incidence goes down, meaning there's something else at play here, and we believe that to be T-cell immunity. The point of my going through all of that is simply to say contact tracing is useless when a disease is widespread like that. Never mind the fact that SARS-CoV-2 is a trivial illness in most situations. By trivial, I mean it's asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic, or recoverable in the vast majority of people. Even up to over age 75, it's about 95% recoverable. So this is lunacy in addition to being extraordinarily wasteful of taxpayer dollars.
I love that. I thought you'd be in the ballpark of that answer. I'm so glad you say that. I want to understand something. Did you just say that even for people over 70, SARS-CoV is 95%? Is that what you said?
That is exactly what I said. SARS-CoV-2 is a disease that doctors can know how to treat and manage. And even above age, it was either 70 or 75, the survival rate is 95%. I know that's astonishing for most listeners. You can go to cdc.gov and you can find those statistics by age for yourself.
Yeah, the cdc.gov website has actually been very helpful for people, probably many who never went to it before, because data are shared there, and it helps people understand. It actually helps reduce the fear in America when you start to see numbers like this. So the other thing I want to ask you about this contact tracing, before we get to the kind of constitutional legal aspects, is another doctor friend of mine called me about when this early was on, and in Texas they were talking about contact tracing, and she was saying the other aspect of it is it's very hard to have effective contact tracing for something spread through the air. That because it's not syphilis, you understand how that is spread, but with contact tracing for something that's airborne, I mean, it's ludicrous to think how many people did you come within, whatever it is, 6 feet of. Is that accurate, that it doesn't work as well anyway in an airborne disease?
That's a very good point. It's certainly much less accurate. Sometimes you might have to do it. You know, when Ebola happened, you did have to be nearby. It wasn't really airborne. However, when you're talking about a coronavirus, which is ubiquitous everywhere, and respiratory transmission, it's particularly useless, but it's also useless because it's so widespread. For instance, we do track tuberculosis cases, and that is respiratory spread. Okay, so I'm not saying you should never possibly consider contact tracing for something like multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which is a highly lethal disease. All right, but we're talking about a coronavirus, and which is mild, and it's ubiquitous, and it's spread through respiratory. With that fact pattern, contact tracing serves no scientific function and serves only to restrict people's freedom, and it will happen to all of us.
It will happen to all of us, especially with an army of that size. One more thing before we get to the constitutional legal issue of contact tracing and the imposition on freedom is, you have talked in the past, but for people who didn't listen to the show when you're on or haven't heard you yet, you talk about the disease of COVID-19 being, or SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, whatever you're supposed to call it, as being more or less not as dangerous as America first thought. Can you just talk briefly about the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine in dealing with and treating people suffering with COVID?
the reason I distinguish between SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 is COVID-19 is really like the illness or the disease, and SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. So in the beginning, before we really knew what we were dealing with, everybody was, I think, right to be kind of cautious. But we've now had we're going on 11 months of this. I mean, this first came out in China in December, so we know a lot more. If the main public health goal was to limit spread of this virus, they would have started or offered the population hydroxychloroquine and zinc prophylactically, because it clearly does that. And countries where hydroxychloroquine and zinc is widely available have minimal disease. That's also why I'm suspicious of any other public health measure. Public health measures that impose upon the public's freedom need to be looked at suspiciously. They're not definitely wrong at the outset, but they need to be looked at very, very carefully and critically. That's what track and trace programs do. Hydroxychloroquine, as you know, and combined with zinc, decrease viral replication. So if you give it before you get the virus or early after contracting the virus, it either limits you from getting the disease at all, or it makes it very, very mild. It's well established. I actually urge everyone to have hydroxychloroquine in their medicine cabinet. If you go to americasfrontlinedoctors.com, you click on where do I get or how do I get hydroxychloroquine, you can get some.
Yeah, that's the most amazing thing. You mentioned that to me before, just to have it in your medicine cabinet and to treat it. The term prophylactic, I'm sure some people know what that means, but it is as a preventative. It's before, so you don't contract it. Should you happen to come in contact, you don't contract it. It's a preventative. Okay, so the reason I want to ask you too about the constitutional or legal issues or just the impact on America is Dr. Simone Gold, in addition to obviously being a doctor, she's also a lawyer. And she had, in one time I heard her speak, was talking about the idea we have a healthcare issue we have to deal with, but we are treating, our response is becoming a constitutional crisis. So do you see a danger to America? Are you concerned about America from a perspective of just the future freedom if we put in place the planned U.S. Public Health Job Corps, 100,000 Americans who are fortunately going to be culturally competent to engage in a massive contact tracing effort?
I'm overwhelmed with what that sentence is that you said. I'm overwhelmed at the massive implications that has for American society. First of all, we don't need to cause citizens to become almost like citizen police, right? You'll have essentially high school graduates enforcing your freedom or lack of freedom.
The idea that we're going to become a society in which the contact tracers, to be really clear what that means, it doesn't mean that if you are ill and they're worried of who you may have exposed, they might say, hey, since you contracted COVID, could you let us know who were where were you yesterday? How many people did you see? Where were you? And it was, and so then you begin to give them lists of names, like you are, I was at the grocery store and then I ran into my neighbor Susie. I talked to her for a while. I ran into guy John. I'm talking to him. I mean, you start to tell them so they can keep track of and then track down the people you saw. Well, all of that builds into a massive spider web of being able to surveil you and your individual privacy. You are able to surveil the government is able to surveil where you were, who you talked to, how you connected.
And what I want to say about that is that this is very, very risky stuff. It's not exactly what you were talking about, but I'm Jewish. And when they sent out the list to the synagogues to track and trace and to write down who's there, I don't know how we have forgotten, just 2 generations removed from the Holocaust, how dangerous this is. Right? This is dangerous stuff to track and trace people. Very, very dangerous.
I could not agree more. I think it is alarming in America, and what I'm in part alarmed about is how many, especially generation below me, that just out of college and the 20, 30-year-olds are not alarmed. They see it as a norm. Oh, the government's just trying to help. Why would you resist? They're just trying to help. And this your point about the synagogues, other people, the government being aware who you hung out with, so people that the government doesn't like very well are then able to say, well, we know you were here. Pretty soon, everyone is subject to government surveillance, and it's voluntary. It's like you're surrendering your freedom. I'm blown away that anyone would go ahead.
For me, this is actually a red line in the sand. I don't think anyone can comply with this. This is horrific. And by the way, SARS-CoV-2 is not serious. Wait until they pull this out on other viruses and other social situations that you don't like or don't agree with. This is horrific. This is a red line in the sand. I personally will never comply with this, and I urge anyone within earshot of my voice to not comply with this.
Could not agree more. And Dr. Gold, I'm so glad you're saying that, because I do think that you're going to hear some people who've been kind of just gone along as we've had COVID come along, and they say, okay, we're going to wear masks, okay, we're socially distanced, okay, we're going to stay home, okay, we're going to, and we limit and limit. We're hearing now governors telling people about Thanksgiving and who you can have at your house. And I think that just, that fundamental notion in America that you have a right, a God-given right, simply because you were born, as the Declaration says, to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It's your right from God, from your Creator, and the government cannot limit it except for very specific reasons. And this COVID it's like it's been an infection all by itself into our belief and freedom in our country. Do you agree?
Yes. I heard somebody coin a phrase called coronaphobia, which is what I'm going to start using. It. Coronaphobia has caused people to be very fearful. And when people are fearful, they can be easily misled and they fall for propaganda. At all times, we have inalienable rights to freedom. I believe in God, but even if you don't believe in God, these rights attach to you as a human being. As a born human being, you have the right to freely assemble. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to freedom of religion. They do not go away simply because a particular governor or particular candidate feels differently about that. It's irrelevant.
I love that you're saying that. I think I love it. She said that. She's exactly right. This is it's a time for people to really step back, even if you were initially frightened by COVID, to initially step back and say, okay, we're in the middle of November, and the death rate the survival rate is above 99%. Why specifically, again, are we agreeing to more control, more regulation? There's a need for a spirit of freedom and self-reliance in America to step up and resist these things. I can't tell. Do we still have? There she is. Go ahead.
Yes. So you don't have to take this on faith. The reason America's frontline doctors came together was so that people could be educated, so they can feel empowered in standing strong for truth and freedom. The truth is on our side. If you need to feel emboldened in that, watch the videos on any subject that appeals to you. It could be about masks. It could be about early treatment. It could be about how we should treat the frail elderly or kids in schools and masks and lockdowns, etc. Get yourself the knowledge base so that you will then stand strong for freedom. It happens that all of the truth is on our side, and we're only being misled because we're ignorant on the subjects. AmericasFrontlineDoctors.com has all the education you'll need. I want to share just a couple of points with you about how wrong the other side has been, or candidate Biden has been. There's 2 points I want to make because they're so obvious. One, just about the masks. I think I mentioned this to you, but if you're wearing a mask and you walk by somebody who's smoking, if you can smell the cigarette smoke, which is much larger in size than the 0.1 micron size of the virus, then obviously the virus is getting through. I'm mentioning that because what you've been told about the masks is patently untrue, and that's a way you can prove it to yourself. The second piece of information I have to mention is you have to listen to the source of who is saying what. I understand candidate Biden identified who he would put on his coronavirus task force. One of the names, many of them are disturbing, but let's just share with you Zeke Emanuel, who you can really call like Dr. Death. What do I mean by that? He literally thinks that you should ration healthcare based upon age, and when you've hit 75, you're good. How anybody could be listening to such a person on matters of health is beyond me. Anybody listening to your program who's in the 7th decade of life or over 70 needs to be very, very nervous about Biden and Zeke Emanuel.
I cannot believe you're mentioning it, because right here in my stack of stuff, my stack of articles, if you go to americacanwetalk.org, I pulled this article up on the homepage, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down list of links, an article about, this is Zeke Emanuel, who happens to be the brother of Rahm Emanuel, also very much the architect of Obamacare, but he actually wrote a lengthy article. We discussed it at great length when he wrote it, appeared in the Atlantic, argued that people who, once they turn 75, should stop getting medical care, should stop getting health care, stop taking medications. Don't deprive the limited supplies of medical care available to younger people. And it is like Dr. Death is gruesome death, and this is someone that Biden wants on his as a COVID advisor. I can't believe you brought that up, Simone, because I was going to bring that up. Simply mind-blowing that his name should be so diminished in public conversation that he doesn't have any role at all, and yet he's the one. And actually, isn't Biden over 75? He is.
Yeah. So Biden is like 79, and Fauci, I think, is 79, and Pelosi is 80, and I think they should just turn themselves in right now. It's unbelievable. It's like, what can you say? My point is that this is the person that he wants to be in charge of you. This is the time to resist that kind of nonsense.
Could not agree more. Simone Gold, I am so grateful you happen to be available today. I know that you are in great demand. You're doing interviews and speeches around the country. I thank you so much for your bravery. I will tell you that, and I'll tell our listeners too. First of all, americasfrontlinedoctors.com. You got a great website, and I tell you folks, they struggled mightily to get this website to stay up because all sorts of social media interference trying to take down videos. Well, you should ask yourself, why would anyone in any social media company want to keep the American people from being able to see videos by doctors who are putting their names and their faces out there, telling you what they know because they've actually been to medical school and they are practicing medicine? And social media is trying to take that down. So you can learn a lot about the truth about COVID, about the way, the various forms of treatment, all the topics that Dr. Gold mentioned. And honestly, the other thing I'll tell you folks, it's great. It's a great thing to know someone like Dr. Simone Gold, because she's being brave. Many doctors just simply, it's easy to be silent. I commend your bravery so much, Dr. Gold.
I just want to thank you very, very much. It's honestly, I don't feel an option. I want to mention also that I wrote a book called I Do Not Consent on Amazon. The reason I'm mentioning it is one question I'm asked repeatedly is how can I, as a non-physician, when people ask me, how can I know what to do? How can I know what the truth is? And I really thought about it, and I wrote in the book how a person can recognize propaganda in real time. I don't think anybody else has written it like this, but you don't need to have a doctorate after your name. You don't need to be a lawyer. If you go through the strategies I laid out, there's an acronym in there, how to recognize propaganda in real time. It's in the book, I Do Not Consent, on Amazon.
Okay, well, I want to just try to make a date here. I'm going to order that book. I honestly haven't done it yet. I Do Not Consent. I Do Not Consent by Dr. Simone Gold on Amazon. I am going to order it, and maybe I'll get you back one more time, Dr. Simone Gold. I'm sorry I'm saying your name. I'm talking so fast. Dr. Simone Gold. So grateful for you. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. Okay, folks, I got to tell you, this is a breath of fresh air in this time when so many voices are urging Americans to fear, to huddle at their homes. You know, we mentioned just one little piece of this Biden plan where he is going to have this massive brown shirt task force roaming around the country questioning people about their health and who they've been around and who they talk to, and keeping track of your movements and where they knew where you were here on this day and here on this day. This could not be creepier. It could not be a more unjustified intrusion into the freedom of the American citizen, and unjustified because of what we all know about COVID now. I urge you to go to Amazon, read Dr. Simone Gold's book, I Do Not Consent. Go to our website, americacanwetalk.org. Read, this is actually not an exaggeration. Joe Biden wants to put on his, if he were, God forbid, to become president, wants to put on his coronavirus task force a doctor who thinks that Joe Biden and Fauci and others above 75 should not be allowed to have access to medicine. He actually, this is not an exaggeration. This is not and by the way, of all bizarre things, this guys, Ezekiel Emanuel is the doctor, brother of Rahm Emanuel. Ezekiel Emanuel actually, shockingly, is a bioethicist. Like, he actually teaches people about ethics related to medicine, and he says people in America and everywhere over 75 ought to give it up, toss it in, and should not have access to medicine anymore. And this is someone that Joe Biden wants on his advisory task force. Simply unbelievable. one last topic for today, or maybe two last topics. A very quick hit on the DOJ election stuff. So finally, you probably saw that Attorney General Barr decided he's actually going to look into this, which is good. This is a start. He's going to look into this election fraud stuff. This goes back to the point I was making in the first 5 today. The DOJ is not going to get involved with a case, for example, in Texas, where I mentioned earlier, somebody working at a senior citizen center registered and voted for a bunch of people who are not mentally sound. That's vote fraud. That is not what the DOJ is, why they're getting involved. They're getting involved because it has become clearer and believed by more and more people who actually follow the evidence that there's evidence of serious election fraud, actually interfering with systemically with the entire election. So Attorney General Barr gave notice that he is going to, in fact, he gave notice within the DOJ that he says he authorized prosecutors to pursue, this is Attorney General Barr's language, pursue substantial allegations of voting and vote tabulation irregularities in certain cases. Such inquiries and reviews may be conducted if there are clear and apparently credible allegations of irregularities that, if true, could potentially impact the outcome of a federal election in an individual state. So Barr says it's okay. So then the next thing that happened was Richard Pilger, Pilger, Richard Pilger, who was formerly the director of election crimes of the election crimes branch of the DOJ, quit. He didn't quit his entire DOJ employment. He quit that position because he doesn't think that the DOJ should look into this. Because he says there's a policy. We don't look into these kinds of issues until after the election is over and the people who benefited from the fraud get to go ahead and take office. That's what his answer was. He said, we don't do this. Very, very bad. We can't do this. He finds it unethical. This week, another name for this guy, Richard Pilger, sounds like he's Mr. Deep State, was probably pretty okay with what was going on, or at least doesn't want to know, does not want to know all of the fraud that has been uncovered in this country. I want to make a correction before I forget. So the website Sidney Powell just created is defendingtherepublic.org. defendingtherepublic.org. You got to go there and understand how important this is, this battle we're in. But so now you have the DOJ looking into it, which is a huge thing. He's stepping down from his current position, so anyway, you have him, Pilger, stepping down, DOJ authorizing looking into it, and actually this guy Pilger, who is so morally virtuous that he cannot look into whether or not the Democrat Party or the left-wing America or the Biden team or whoever it is who's been conducting this nefarious pilfering, this nefarious seeming to be electronic manipulation of voter data being held in computers. That's what the allegation is. This is what the allegation that Sidney Powell is talking about. Many informed Americans, I've seen actually the lengthy layout of the evidence, and it's pretty darn overwhelming. And so now the DOJ says, I guess we better look into it, and this guy is going to quit. He was okay, apparently, because he was also one involved with the lowest learner at the IRS when the Obama administration was essentially permitting the IRS to target conservative organizations, Tea Parties and such, refusing to give them or slow rolling their application to get 501c3 status. So this is a guy who has accused himself of targeting conservatives along with Lois Lerner, and yet somehow he's far too morally virtuous to look into whether actual election fraud has been occurring, which it now does appear it has been. So that guy has quit. I will tell you something else. I use the expression Biden buyer remorse. I will tell you, you hear more people, and the one particular prominent person happened to do this, and I sent this to Matt the Wonderful. This is an author. I've never heard of her, but Dr. Naomi Wolf. And she put on Twitter, she had 2 tweets. I wanted the shorter first one. She put up on Twitter, if I had known Biden was open to lockdowns, as he now states, which is something historically unprecedented in any pandemic and a terrifying practice, one that won't ever end because elites love it, I would never have voted for him. I want you to think about that, people. This is a woman apparently intelligent enough to earn a doctorate. I think she's an author. I don't know who she is, an author or something. But she puts a tweet out saying, hey, I can't believe that the Democrat Party is open to lockdowns, that Biden is open to mask mandates and lockdowns. This is someone, she voted with clearly exactly zero information what she was talking about. Zero. She voted because the left-wing media in this country has spent 4 years pillorying President Trump, accusing him of things he didn't do, accusing him of causing COVID, accusing him of the Russia collusion thing, which was a farce, accusing him of the whole incident with the Ukrainians that led to the farce of an impeachment, accusing him in COVID of being at fault. So the media has been, and the Democrat media mob, as I often call them, attacking Trump all this time. This is probably someone who reads headlines in the Washington Post and assumes she's well informed, had no idea what the Democrat Party has become, no idea what Biden was going to do. She had a second tweet up, this Dr. Naomi Wolf. So she's complaining. Shouldn't we have seen Biden's policies in detail before the election? Only at Daily Clout report on platforms in detail, and his wish to invest in 5G and electric cars as top U.S. priorities was not foregrounded by Biden. And so she's quoting from an article, what are Joe Biden's major policies? And as many people on Twitter piled on, yes, he did. He talked about it. Biden talked about it. It's been out there in his policy. If you dive in and read his website, he's talked about all these kind of things, including that. But I love that she put the tweets up. I'm sorry she's so ignorant, but I really think this goes to the point about the responsibility of American citizens to do more than read headlines in left-wing media and think that they're well informed. She voted for Biden because someone told her Trump's not nice, or someone told her Trump caused the COVID virus. He did something wrong. It would have all gone away if he done the right thing. She bought into the media, left-wing Democrat media mob lies, voted for Biden, and she's now having Biden buyer's remorse. You know, we don't even have Biden yet, to be clear. We're whatever we are ahead of the election. You know, we're still, December 14th is the day Electoral College. We're still in the middle of deciding who won the election. But I really think it does matter to recognize there are people out there who did not want and will not want what the Biden team will do to America. They never voted for it. They didn't want it. They didn't understand it. And if you watched the show yesterday, and I had John Guandolo on the show, and we talked about again the idea that what we're watching the 2020 election cycle is the culmination of decades and decades of leftist assault on America. Leftist assault on the idea of America, the founding of America, the founding ideas of freedom given in the Declaration of Independence and spelled out and given form in the Constitution. You've had the left attacking America ideologically for 100 years. And you've had them making success and progress in the universities and then the lower schools and K through 12 schools, making progress, changing and molding the American people's perception so they no longer understand America to be the great, the noble, the exceptional that it is. And they learn lies about America from the leftists who have assaulted our institutions in this country. And then you lead us up to where we have the Communist Party figuring out, use race as an issue to contort and twist and lie to the American people, about the state of affairs in our country. So you've had racial manipulation of America's society. You've had the communist infestation of our culture and society, leading us to where you could actually have a Democrat, Bernie Sanders, nearly win the nomination 4 years ago, and in the running this time again, mainstreaming radical Marxist, socialist, communist ideas as though they belong in America, mainstreaming them, normalizing them in the minds and hearts of the American people. And then you get to 2020, and you know, Bernie Sanders didn't win the nomination, but he won clout over the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party's agenda is radically Marxist leftist. And there are plenty of Americans, sadly, there are millennials and others who are Marxists, who are socialists, who are communists, and they're fine with that agenda. But I'm telling you folks, number one, 80 million people did not vote for Biden. That did not happen. There is massive election fraud. In addition to the voter fraud we've been talking about, massive election fraud. And on top of that, there has been a mass duplicity inflicted on the American people by leftists in this country who have managed to undermine the love of America, the valuing of the uniqueness of America, that the left has accomplished this over decades, and we're now seeing the fruition. This election 2020 is not about D versus R, liberal or conservative. It's about you either throw America away over the cliff to radical Marxism, which is where the Biden administration is headed. It is where Kamala Harris lives ideologically, or you hold on to the America of the founding, America the free. There simply are not 80 million Americans who want what the Biden team intends to do to America. It could not be more important for every court involved, every entity involved, every individual involved to fight to the death legally to get to the answer, what is the count of actual legal votes in this country? Legal votes. What is the manipulation that occurred behind the scenes in the early voting, electronic manipulation? Where did it happen? How can we prove it? And how do we reverse it? How do we expose it? And then all those people complicit in that need to be brought to justice. We are in the most, as you just heard, I think I mentioned yesterday or today, Sidney Powell said, this is the most important 2 months in America's history. We're either going to hold on to America or we're going to lose it. Okay, last thing to tell you very, very quickly, we're about out of time here, but a very quick thing. So I mentioned the other day, speaking of just kind of a form of vote fraud, or really, yeah, I guess it's more vote fraud versus election fraud. But you remember when I was telling you about a postal worker. There now have been at least 3 who've come forward, but a postal worker coming forward saying how he had been told these mail-in ballots that came in too late, came in past the deadline of Election Day, so they couldn't get postmarked by Election Day. He was told to put them in a special bin, and the post office was going to backdate them. So he goes to Project Veritas and says, hey, I'm just going to tell you this doesn't sound right to me. It sounds like they're cheating. I don't know. So that guy went ahead and the video went out, the viral video, Project Veritas puts it out there. The post office is actually engaged in helping. It wasn't just one office either, helping the mail-in ballots get stamped so they can be counted when they actually are illegal votes because they were not cast in accordance with the law of that state. They were sent in too late. So this guy now, he goes forward to Project Veritas. Well, this poor guy, his name is Richard Hopkins. He got a visit. He got a visit from federal officials who came to him to arm twist him, to end up having him try to take back his story. In fact, the Washington Post, I think it was, ran with the story. Washington Post claimed this guy, Richard Hopkins, had actually, pulled back the story or reneged, recanted, said I never said that. Isn't what true. That didn't really happen. And so you quickly had all these Democrats in Congress tweeting out, see, it never really happened. The Oversight Committee, chaired by, what's her name there? Carolyn Maloney, I think it is. Yeah, Carolyn Maloney, a Democrat in the U.S. House, called it false allegations, saying that this is done to sow distrust, this is misinformation, and it erodes trust in our democracy. I mean, she's basically saying this Postal Service whistleblower recanted his allegations. And he, the Postal Service worker, is saying, no, I didn't. I did not recant what I said. But the point in closing out today's is how invested the left in this country is, and many people who I would call deep state are in covering up all the wrongdoing in this election. Listen to this one clip. I want to, Matt the Wonderful, I want to play the one clip that is by, it actually has the, Richard Hopkins, postal worker, is describing the federal agents. You can hear the federal agents' voices. They recorded them, what they said to him. Federal agents approached Richard Hopkins, grilled him for 2 hours, and tried to get him to change his story. Let's quick hear that video.
Let me make good on that promise right away, okay? This storm is getting crazy, right? And it's out of a lot of people's control. And so the reason they called me in is to try to harness that storm, try to reel it back in before it gets really crazy, okay?
I understand.
Because we have senators involved, we have the Department of Justice involved, we have
Trump's lawyers team's gotten a hold of me.
I'm not, well, I am actually. I am trying to twist you a little bit because in that, believe it or not, your mind will kick in.
Okay.
We like to control our mind, and when we do that, we can convince ourselves of a memory. But when you're under a little bit of stress, which is what I'm doing to you purposely, your mind can be a little bit clearer. And we're going to do a different exercise too to make your mind a little bit clearer. Okay?
Good to go.
So, but this is all on purpose.
Roger.
I am not scaring you, but I am scaring you.
Okay, if you listen to the whole tape, this is a federal official threatening this postal worker and trying to get him to recant what he said. And then later gets reported he recanted. This guy, this postal worker, has put another video out. He's still saying to Project Veritas, I never recanted. I never took it back. I never told them it didn't happen, because it did. This is what my boss told me. But I want you to think about the level of corruption involved. A federal official arm twisting and scaring, by his own admission, a postal service worker who is telling what happened to him when his own boss told him to put ballots that were mailed too late into a different bin so they could be backdated and counted. And this is such a problem to the federal government that they send agents to threaten and arm twist him. He says, we're out of time, I can't play it, but there was another video where he says, yeah, I was scared. I was scared when they were talking to me. This is people, we're in the middle of watching an enormous, impossible to overstate consequence of an investigation into the level and depth and scope of election fraud in this country, the likes of which America has never, ever seen. That's what we're facing in this country right now. Stand behind President Trump and his determination to get to the point where every single legal vote counts. And every other vote that wasn't legal, or that wasn't cast by someone who's a legal voter, or that was manipulated in the system, gets fixed. We cannot surrender America to the radical Marxist agenda that's now taken over the Democrat Party, based on an election that was, in my view, clearly the attempted theft of this election by the Democrat Party, by the Biden team, trying to suppress everyone and everything who is calling out the unfairness, the irregularities, the bizarre behavior of many election officials in this cycle. Watch closely what Sidney Powell is doing. Watch closely for people arguing and trying to bring out more and more about what Russ Ramsland has shown on my show, he's shown on many shows, which is there are actual experts who look into this, and the potential for actually changing the outcome of elections exists by just the use of the electronic manipulation of voter data stored in computers. We talked about the whole computer thing yesterday, the programs, the connections between those programs and the many people on the left, including Soros type people involved in those computer programs. It's that people, it could not be a more serious time in America. Do not give in to the people saying, well, you know, fair is fair, Trump's got to give it up. If Trump lost, he has a lot of great plans for 4 years. I can't wait to watch what he's going to do. But where we stand right now, massive election fraud appears to be nearly certainly to have occurred. And everyone who cares about America's future needs to be on the side of getting to the truth of all of it. As I do at the close of every show, I tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started today talking about, let's see, our very first one today was vote fraud versus election fraud, why it matters. Dead voters, fake voters, backdated ballots, forged ballots, nursing home, block voters, all this is serious. But it's vote fraud, and they may invalidate a certain state's elections. But vote fraud is trifling compared with election fraud. Election fraud involves systemic, planned, and plotted changing of vote counts, millions of votes potentially altered, masking a Trump landslide, which I still stand by is exactly what happened. A Trump landslide happened. Hammer, Scorecard, Dominion Voting Systems, and other names raised by Russ Ramson's work discussed on this show are gaining attention. Trump's tweets and Sidney Powell's interviews suggest systemic election fraud is about to be exposed. It may shock the conscience of even a large segment of Democrat voters. This is why Sidney Powell says this is not about D's and R's. This is a hostile takeover attempt. The most important 2 months in U.S. history are coming up. Pray for this country. The DOJ election fraud and the Biden buyer remorse. Why it matters? Barr's recent order is big, opens up federal investigation authority that has been stifled by old policy of investigating fraud allegations after the cheaters had already won. Ousted Pilger, the ringleader in protecting Lois Lerner's attacks on the Tea Parties, election fraud implications are dawning on some Democrats. Mainstream media censorship of Biden's positions made many believe the only issue was personality. Even Dr. Naomi Wolf would never have voted for Biden had she known. Biden's intended mask mandates and rejoining Paris Accord, crippling the U.S. economy, expect more of Biden's remorse to surface rapidly and more fraud. And the feds question a Postal Service whistleblower. Project Veritas captured federal agents arm twisting a Postal Service whistleblower, trying to force him to recant. Washington Post headlines, false news that he recanted. He remains adamant, no recanting, fraud is real. In fact, he put a video out calling on the Washington Post to recant their lie, which they'll never do. Folks, this is a swamp exemplified. Attorney General Bill Barr orders feds to take election fraud claims seriously, yet holdover federal agents do the opposite. The fix and the coup runs the deep state and runs deep. Flushing out this evil will require Americans' fortitude, and it will be worth it. And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Go to our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage, do two things. Hit subscribe, get my weekly newsletter, and hit donate and support this show. The show is funded entirely by listener support. I need your support. One-time donation, recurring donation. All of this is done out of love by me, out of love of America. No salary, no pay. Love of America is why I do this. And I really need your support, and I'd appreciate it very much. AmericaCanWeTalk.org. I also urge you, whatever social media you're on, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, comment. You can email me at americacanwetalk@gmail.com. americacanwetalk@gmail.com. I will try to respond to everyone, although I'm way behind, but I will try. And I also want to thank you once again for listening to America Can We Talk every Monday through Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.